December meeting of the Safe Communities Committee. Apologies for the slightly delayed start. I know a couple council members were coming straight in here from other obligations, and those ran over. So we have a quorum now. Councilmember Johnson will not be joining us. We are certainly thinking about her. She is with her family today, mourning the loss of a loved one. So our thoughts to her today. We'll start with introductions and then dive right into it. We'll start to my left.
Federico Rios, Office of Equity, Mobility, and Immigrant Integration.
Johnny Jennings, Chief of Police.
Victoria Johnson, Assistant City Manager.
Larkin Eggleston, Committee Chair.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Sarah Hazel, City Manager's Office.
Other committee members that are on the call, then staff, then guests.
Jennifer Lynchman, committee member.
Victoria Watlington, committee member.
Lacey Williams, Office of Equity.
Mr. Decker.
Hi, I wasn't sure if everyone had gone yet. Brent Decker from Cure Violence.
All right, wonderful. Well, we will start with Assistant City Manager Victoria Johnson to give us a preview of what we're going to get into today, and then Sarah Hazel will be leading us through the Cure Violence update. We don't have any votes today, but we wanted to make sure we had a quorum of the committee before we got into this, because while we're not voting on it today, it will be coming before the council in the near future, and we want to make sure that the members of this committee feel comfortable bringing this forward to our colleagues and helping them understand it as we come towards a vote on it, and understanding all of the data that came out of the assessment and initial engagement with Cure Violence. So, Ms. Johnson?
Yes. So we're going to have a Cure Violence informational update. That'll be led by Sarah Hazel, along with the guest, Brent Decker. And also following that, an update on the Charlotte Safety Summit by Lacey Williams, immediately following the presentation by Sarah Hazel. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. We're just going to wait 1 second for the presentation to pull up. But while we do that, what I'm going to do is just walk through the assessment of the Cure Violence assessment, both the objectives and also the process. And then I'm going to invite Brent Decker from Cure Violence Global to talk a little bit about the findings from the assessment. So it's going to be broken into two portions, and there'll be time for question and answers throughout. But I guess before I start, and while this is loading, I just want to acknowledge a couple of people who have really spent a lot of time on city staff on this assessment, both thinking very deliberately about how to engage the community and also doing a lot of organizing virtual and in-person assessment, which was obviously not the initial plan when we started this conversation about a year ago. So Lacey Williams, I just want to acknowledge her leadership, as well as Federico Rios. I'd also like to make sure that I give a shout out to Cherry Grant for her work, as well as Rebecca Hefner and CMPD for all of the work that they've done around data in the 4 priority areas. That data was integral in sharing with Cure Violence Global during this assessment process, and there was just a lot of work that went into it. So I just want to take a moment to make sure that those folks receive some good credit where it's due. And we're just waiting for the presentation to load. All right. Okay, so let's see if I can. Perfect. So I know that you have seen this slide in many presentations over the past year, but I just wanted to start with a brief reminder that this committee worked really hard a little less than a year ago on this comprehensive framework to address violence. Since then, that's guided a lot of the work that we've done, and certainly has fallen under the Safe Charlotte framework, and is included in the report, and that was issued not that long ago and that council adopted. The county has also adapted this framework to support the work that they're doing, and really that work is a collaboration between the city and county and other agencies. I'm highlighting the interrupt violence because that was a key component of this framework that was adopted. And it actually came out of a conversation and analysis that was done by CMPD, the Center for Data Analytics, with Rebecca Hefner and GovX out of Johns Hopkins about a year ago, where they looked at violence data, looked at where violence had been persistent over time, and then developed several recommendations around addressing violence as a public health issue. And one of those recommendations was to explore violence interruption as an evidence-based program. And so that sort of brings us to where we are today to give an update specifically on Cure Violence. And so the Cure Violence work around violence interruption, it aligns with the city strategy in 3 major ways. One is through the pillar of intergovernmental collaboration. So this is a partnership with the city and the county. We've been working with Bernard, who's the deputy health director, and they just brought on their new violence program manager. And so she has just joined this team. They've also committed to shared funding of an eventual program. So I think that's really important to highlight. And obviously, violence interruption is all about leveraging credible community members to interrupt, detect, and prevent violence. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that could look like in the Charlotte community today. And finally, using data and evidence is one of the other key pillars that it touches on. And that is a public health model that's been used, and Cure Violence Global has used this model and helped different jurisdictions set this model up in cities across the country and also in cities across the world. So the Cure Violence assessment really kind of breaks down into 2 buckets. So I'm not going to read all of these for you, but I think the main objectives is to really understand from Cure Violence's perspective and from all of their work, is there the capacity and will from the government and the agencies, relevant agencies, to implement a Cure Violence program? And so that's both, is there sort of the political will, the community, staff community will and support, and then also, is there the data that is needed to be able to measure results of this program, to understand who is most likely to be involved in violence, and to ensure that this program can be monitored over time. And so then that's the one piece on this left-hand side that you're looking at. The second piece is, are there folks in the community who could act as these credible interrupters to detect, to interrupt violence, to diffuse situations, to provide alternatives? And then sort of one level up from that, are there host organizations, whether it's nonprofit, community groups, that could stand up this program, contract with city and county to implement the program and then hire those interrupters? And so that's really what Cure Violence Global was looking at doing during this assessment. And finally, based on these 2 buckets, they developed some initial program recommendations around how many staff would it take to stand up a program, and what are some of the strategies, what are some of the obstacles, and how do we do so far against these questions. And so the assessment was broken into several phases. And first, there was the phase all around sort of orienting all the important stakeholders to what is this public health approach that Cure Violence uses to violence interruption. And so through a series of virtual meetings that was held, Cure Violence staff was sort of a 101 session and a Q&A session around this work. Then there was more individualized meetings, including a meeting where we really dug into that data that I was talking about earlier, and met with some other key partners, like the hospitals who receive folks who are victims of violence often, as well as meeting with potential host organizations and potential interrupters who were interested. So that was all done virtually. And then at the end of October, Cure Violence came to meet with some of those same stakeholders in person, but also get a chance to visit the target area, and that's the priority area, which is the Beatty-Ford and LaSalle area that was identified way back in January that we talked about as one of the key areas that this model could be effective. And then now we're in this final phase, which is really just about understanding, what did Cure Violence find, and then what would the next steps be, and sharing that information with you so you can determine if we move forward. So this is just to sort of highlight the in-person visit. So it was a 3-day visit. Typically, the whole thing is done in person again, but because of COVID, this was split virtual and in person. There was more of an opportunity to continue to do deeper engagement with some of the core neighborhood leaders, as well as community officer. This is just a picture of one of those meetings that was conducted, as well as there were several opportunities to meet right around the priority area with some of the local organizations. And so following that assessment, Cure Violence had some more follow-up work to do, so reaching out to some of the folks that they got a chance to maybe talk with briefly or not meet with in person, but wanted to get a chance to speak to because of some of the referrals from folks on the ground. And so that occurred over the last month, and so here we are today. And so I'll pause here because this is where my portion ends, just kind of bringing you up to speed as to where we are, and then Brent's next. So I think we have Brent on the line.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to move to this next slide for you, Brent, and you can let us know how the assessment went.
Sure, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending some time with me and us this afternoon to kind of review what we found during the assessment. And so Sarah went over the criteria that we look at. And every place that Cure Violence operates, we go through this process, be it in Charlotte, South Africa, Baltimore. I mean, because the idea is making sure that the right kind of local capacities exist so that we can ensure that this program is going to have the results that we've seen it have all over the world. And so the first thing that we really look at is there a government or non-governmental agency with the capacity and will to implement the model? And for us, from day one, really, we could see the answer was yes, in terms of our working with the city manager's office and the Office of Immigrant Integration. I mean, it was just clearly a high capacity, high will. And so we felt very comfortable, I think, probably after the first meeting or so, just in terms of really understanding kind of the commitment and really the broad strategic thinking about violence prevention. Because we often say, like, Cure Violence is not the solution, and it best operates as part of a broader strategy, and it has a very particular lane in terms of working with the highest risk to interrupt violent events. And it can't just operate alone. And so I think we feel very confident and very comfortable in terms of kind of the broader strategy the city and county are taking in Charlotte, and how this could really be helpful as part of reducing violence. And so I think that context is really important. There have been instances in dealing with other cities and communities where it hasn't been part of a broader strategy, and sometimes we are kind of less comfortable with that. And so I think that for us, we really found the governmental aspect of this to be very positive, and kind of the thinking and strategies that are all put in place to be extremely well thought out. The next set of questions that we have is looking at data, and being a public health approach, this issue of data is supremely important. And so I think some of the first conversations we had in terms of data from the CPD and then the Community Violence Data Dashboard really exceeded the requirements. And we were actually, I will say this data dashboard I've been doing this work for about 18 years. It was perhaps one of the most comprehensive dashboards that I've seen a city have kind of in place. And I know that it might be new or that it's getting started, but really it's an opportunity to inform, I think, not only what Cure Violence is part of it potentially could be in preventing violence, but I think the collaboration across law enforcement, health department, and other city agencies to put that database together is really remarkable. And I hope that other cities will learn from that, because I think it's really critical in making both programmatic decisions and policy decisions, but then also being able to track impact. And so I think in terms of the data, well exceeded any kind of requirements we have. And I will also say that that is not always the case. I mean, there have been times that we're working with cities that the data around shootings and homicides is in a notebook somewhere. And so I think we're very, very impressed with what the city of Charlotte and county had put together. And so that then both helps us determine kind of the target areas, the number of violent incidents that are taking place, but then also looking at criteria for those who are most likely to be involved in violence and kind of our understanding of it. And so it really covered all of the aspects of it in a very important way. When we looked at community organizations, we spent a lot of time both virtually and in person, and I think Charlotte uniquely there was a lot of interest from a lot of different organizations that have kind of various levels of either violence intervention work or community work that have very strong and deep ties to the community that Betty's for LaSalle that we were talking about. And so we spent a lot of time, and I think learned a lot in terms of just kind of the community understanding and perspective and some of the experience as it relates to understanding some of the dynamics with violence. And so I think what we saw, though, is that there were a number of viable groups that we met with. There might be some requirement in terms of some additional support in terms of some of fiscal management. A lot of the groups that we met with, I think, have very strong connections in the community, but might not have the experience in managing grants or large amounts of money. And this is typical. This wasn't, there's been a number of instances in St. Louis, Baltimore, even in New York, where you have a kind of a strong community group that may not have that experience. And then so partnering with potentially a fiscal agent to kind of help with that aspect of it is something that we've seen in other cities, and that might be the case in Charlotte. And the reason that it's important to do that, though, is having the community-based partner be the lead is it's the type of connection and the type of kind of day-to-day interaction with the community and the highest risk that really is some of the larger agencies might not have that very specific connection with. And so I think it's definitely worth the effort in thinking about, if there are local groups that exist, which they do, potentially figuring out a way to be supportive in terms of some of the fiscal stuff. In terms of do individuals exist who can fulfill the role of interrupters and outreach workers? So the 3 days that we were there, we didn't meet specifically with anyone. We met with a lot of people that knew a lot of people, and in the intervening time since we left, we've had a number of phone calls and Zoom calls and FaceTime on the phone, where we feel confident that we're like one step away, and now feel like we have a couple of strong people that potentially could serve those roles. And this is, sometimes this does happen in the assessment visits, and I shared the story when I was there, that in Honduras, in San Pedro Sula, I was there for a month, ready just to go home and say this isn't going to work. Doing this because we couldn't find, the individuals to serve as interrupters just because of the different dynamic there. And I feel like within the 3 days and some of the previous conversations, I think we were very close. Then after we left, I feel like we were able to kind of identify what the real recruitment strategies might be. And so we're pretty confident that people do exist that are interested in it. It was just during those 3 days and COVID, it didn't pan out the way that we had hoped, but it wasn't totally unexpected given some of the dynamics. And so I think in the interim time, and especially working with some of the staff from the Office of Equity, we've been able to arrange some phone calls and had some follow-up conversations. So I think if we were to move forward with this project, there'd be a clear recruitment strategy that we'd be able to hire interrupters and outreach workers that meet the profile they're going to be able to implement the program so that we can see results. And then in terms of the initial program recommendations, in looking at the data, in walking through, we spent a lot of time in the target area, thinking through like what a staffing pattern would be that would make sense. And so the things that we look at in considering that is kind of the level and rates of violence, the geographic area, some of the population, and then there is a bit of an experienced art to it in terms of just spending some time there and really feeling how big or small the area is. And so we really thought that a staffing pattern of 5 to 6 frontline staff would meet the kind of need of the area, and also understanding that because there is a kind of transitory nature of somewhere, there's a stores there, and there's a lot of kind of number of churches that people kind of come to from all over, that if we had a staffing pattern of 5 to 6, we would be very deliberate about having individuals that we recruit that have relationships in other parts of the city, so that if a conflict does happen within the area with someone who's from outside the area, being able to kind of build on some of those relationships to prevent further retaliation or further violence. Because in our mind, in Cure Violence, what we train on with the communities and cities we work with is anything that affects the target area is the target area. And so there's a lot of instances where we have, violence that's happening in an area that might not be for the exact residents there, but there is kind of coming from other parts of the city. So just thinking that through. And so we thought that this staffing pattern for that budget more or less would make sense given everything that we saw and experienced while we were there and some of the previous conversations we had. And so that would be kind of a medium-sized program. There are some sites that have that are smaller, and then there's some, like in cities in New York, that just are way more densely populated that are much larger than that. But we feel pretty confident that a staffing pattern like this, we could see the type of reductions that we've seen in other areas. And so I think those were some of our kind of first set of understanding of the assessment visit. I think also part of the initial program recommendations we've talked kind of briefly and would be, in a final report, just in terms of some of the recruitment strategies, some of what the kind of trainings and technical assistance would be from us, and how to move this forward in a way that's strategic, that is part of the broader strategy, and that can help with the reduction of violent incidences in the community that we're working in. So Sarah, I think that was just my very kind of brief overview of the slide. And I think I also want to thank everyone that we met with, the community groups, in the city manager's office, and the Office of Equity. I mean, it was been a very, I think, good learning exchange, and we feel confident that if we're to move forward with this, that we can see reductions.
Great. So then let me just end with sort of next steps.
So Sarah, I don't know, did you want me to go over this slide, or was that?
That's me, Brent.
Okay, great.
So then from the city side, this is what we see as our next steps. So obviously we're sharing this information today with you, Council Committee, and then we'll bring this information to the December 14th meeting. And then depending on that meeting, if Council says, yep, move forward, then there'd be a couple steps that we'd take. So continue to work with Cure Violence. So that would be setting up a contract for technical assistance so they can help support, train, and measure results. They can also support the RFP process, and they had some specific recommendations about how we can do that and ensure that there's some community support in that process. We would conduct an RFP for a community group that would actually run the program. And then depending on how that RFP would go, we would also be looking at if there's a fiscal agent support needed based on the initial recommendations from Cure Violence. So once all that was completed, that's when the program would be implemented. But obviously, there's a critical path here in order to get started. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Sarah. I've got a couple questions, and then Ms. Ajmera and Ms. Watlington might as well. One, help me understand, either of you, Brent or Sarah, the $80,000 for technical assistance with Cure Violence, is that a year one only fee, or is that a recurring line item in the budget? It would be, or a recurring line item in the budget?
So, Brent, I can let you talk a little bit about that's comprised of, and there's a little bit of information in the appendix about that too, but.
Well, and then as a second part of that question that you might be able to answer all together, is the second budgetary item you call out there, the $390,000, with that being, it's underneath what you're saying is conduct an RFP process. So is that accounting for a cost of an RFP process that is a one-time expense? And if so, what would that recurring line item change to going forward? So, I mean, we're looking at $470,000 for year one for the two things that are on the slide in front of us, but what does year two through infinity look like in terms of a budgetary line item?
So, and Brent, please correct me if I'm wrong. So my understanding would be not only would this would be a year one, but we would be looking at, for this scale of a program, this type of budget year two, assuming that the results are in line with what this council and this community is looking to see. And then the technical assistance that Cure Violence does, there's elements of it that are setting up a program, but then there's also ongoing weekly meetings. There's a database to kind of measure and track activities and results. And so as long as we are running a Cure Violence and a certified program, that would be expense into the future if we wanted to do it like that. But Brent, you can talk a little bit about how other cities have done that.
Yeah, so the technical assistance in year one is the heaviest and most costly year. And so essentially what Sarah had mentioned, it's really more of the setup stuff and the trainings. And then what we typically do with cities who are interested in continuing relationship, it goes, I mean, our objective is to build a local capacity, share best practices, share the training, so that the money that has to go to us decreases over time. And so we have some cities that started, much larger, and then it ends up being, like, I don't know, $15,000 to $20,000 a year just for upkeep or a couple trainings. And so it's really largely dependent on what the city's interested in doing. But year one is usually the heaviest cost in terms of just setup and training everyone on how to do the work, getting the database set, and then the prices decrease. In terms of the sites, though, I think the site cost, when we talk about the RFP process, the majority of these expenses would be on the positions of interrupters and outreach workers and their supervisors. And so those costs wouldn't change too much. This would be, kind of an ongoing expense in doing this work.
So then my other question would be, as the timeline progresses towards this coming to council in just under 2 weeks, for at least an initial discussion, but shortly thereafter, I assume, a decision, would council be making a decision? You've said you believe that the individuals who would fulfill the roles of violence interrupters and outreach workers do exist in our community, though you've not yet identified them, and we've said that we would conduct an RFP process to find a community-based organization that would execute or perform the work over time. Would those be, I guess, by council deciding to move forward with this process, would that then start those two things, identifying those violence interrupters, identifying the community-based organization, or is that something you'd try to do and bring as part of the proposal to council? Does that make sense?
So, yeah, so as part of the city manager's commitment, we said we were going to come to council after this assessment is done. And so if based on the findings of this assessment, if council says, okay, proceed, at that point, so based on this initial work, there's already groups that may fit the right profile, some interrupters who might fit the right profile, but we would start the formal process of doing an RFP and allowing the whole community to, as many groups, even folks who haven't been a part of this process so far, to apply to potentially be the host organization. So we would start at that point, although all this work in the lead up that Cure Violence has done will help support those next steps. But the official panel process of hiring interrupters with the host organization that's selected through the RFP,
So the host
that will come
organization will be
next.
part of identifying the interrupters.
That's accurate.
Okay. And would that be another approval, based on some conversations with council members? I know there is some specific interest in what organization ends up being the place that this program would be housed, for instance. Is that another decision council would make, or by or I guess blessing the idea of the city manager continuing forward with this engagement with Cure Violence, would Cure Violence be the one who would make the decision on who the community-led organization is?
So we would, the city and the county, working together would do an RFP process that would be consistent with the way that we typically do RFP processes. We just have the additional support and model RFPs, that we've already been able to receive from Cure Violence to go through that process, but we would do our traditional city process. And so that would, the same parameters that fall under that process and any other program we'd be starting, we would use.
Ms. Ajmera, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions for staff. So just so that I understand, so are you recommending that Cure Violence would be the primary contractor that we move forward with for technical assistance?
So our recommendation is that we continue to work with Cure Violence for technical assistance. They would be providing the support that a community-based organization would eventually need to implement this evidence-based model that's implemented in cities across the country. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, we believe that based on our work during this assessment with them and the community relationships that they've already begun to start with, that they would be the technical assistance partner to help the city and the county and eventually the host organization be successful in this effort. But if you look at the breakdown of the costs, the primary group that we would be working with would be the host organization, which would be a community organization that was selected through this process, who would hire local individuals.
I understand. So to follow up on that, Sarah, Councilmember Johnson had sent out an email, I believe on Monday, and she had inquired about an organization who had submitted that proposal that happens to be a local organization. So have we looked at, or can we look at, how does those proposals compare to the one from Cure Violence? And also, what additional information is needed in order to consider the local organization as a primary contract, not in addition to, so not in addition to. So can we get that information? Can we get a response to those questions that Councilmember emailed us on Monday?
Ms. Ajmera, your signal's a little choppy and your volume's a little low, so I don't know if Ms. Hazel, I heard enough to know what you were referencing. I don't know if Ms. Hazel received the email from Councilmember Johnson, but I did, and I think, and if you have seen it, you can chime in here, but I think that would be an ideal organization to have apply as part of the RFP process for the community-based organization.
So and I'll just add in, I did get a chance very briefly to look at it. It was forwarded to me. And I think that's absolutely an option, what Councilmember Eggleston just said, but I haven't had a chance to chat with them or talk with them. I guess the other piece is, just like during this assessment, Cure Violence was able to note that there's obviously so much great work that's going on in the community, and a lot of this work works together, and there are opportunities that council has approved for the future with grants, both existing grants like our Jumpstart grants, but then also a larger grant process that is under the Safe Charlotte recommendation. So without knowing lots of details, it sounds like there's probably lots of really good opportunities to bring them into the fold.
And Ms. Ajmer, I think the point you were making, as well as Ms. Johnson had made in that email, was we want to make sure that this is a locally led effort, because who knows better what our community needs than people in our community. And frankly, we want to invest in our community with the dollars we're spending. So I'm not sure at the beginning of all this, had as clear an understanding as I have after the presentation today, but it does look like, that more than 3/4 of our investment here is going to be to a community-based organization here locally in Charlotte to lead the work, and that Cure Violence is simply kind of providing us with the framework and the roadmap for a local group to execute. And I do think, and I just took another glance at Ms. Johnson's email, that plan that they sent forward to her that she passed along to us does seem like it would be the type of thing we'd be looking for as we conduct the RFP, looking for someone to lead. Did you have any other questions, Ms. Ajmer?
Yes, so to add to that, so if the community-based local organization is doing the work, I'm interested in understanding, can they still do the technical assistance? And what is the gap there, right, compared to Cure Violence? I think we should consider local organizations. I would be interested in seeing how many proposals we have gotten from local organizations to be the primary contractor on this effort. If they're doing the work, have we considered them for technical assistance as well? So if we can get that information, that would be great, Mr. Jones. And that's all I have. Also, I understand that Brent had mentioned earlier about meeting with several groups and individuals. Can we get a list of the groups and individuals that Cure Violence have met with so far? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, Sarah, I assume we can get that out to the committee?
Yep, no problem.
Great, thank you. Ms. Watlington?
Yes, I've got a couple questions. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, or at least that I understand the sequencing. Because what I'm hearing feels like that some of us are understanding that the RFP is happening right now, and that there are organizations who have submitted proposals. But what I'm understanding based on this information is that the only thing that's been done to date is the initial assessment, which we had already assigned to Cure Violence ahead of time.
Correct.
So, so at the end of this stage, then we will decide whether or not to proceed with an RFP. And as part of the RFP, the outcome will be a selection of an organization that will run this program going forward.
Correct.
Okay, so with that said, if you can go back to the assessment slide, where you've got the table and you've got the two different colors, like 5 bullets. Yes. Okay, so I am there's some feedback. Can you hear that too? I think somebody's not on mute in the room, perhaps. Okay. These to me read like go, no go gauges, right? And so when I see things like additional support needed to bolster existing viable candidates, I would like to see that ahead of us considering to approve moving forward with an RFP. The reason I say that is because I'm not sure that the technical assistance that is listed in the appendix is sufficient to bring candidates up to a place where they can actually deliver a good RFP. And I don't want us assessing proposals that we already know is not going to hit the mark for what we need. So for me, I'd like to understand what is the plan to close whatever gaps we see in the community so that we are that we have the foundation to even conduct an RFP, because I don't want us to be picking the potential of an organization. I want us to see that they have been able to have that capability built, and they can put together an RF or a proposal for an RFP that is sound. You see what I'm saying? I feel like we'd be leaning in too much to say, we know we don't have organizations, we know that we have not, though we think they're here, we have to put our faces or our eyes on the individuals that will run the program. We need to see that before we are making a decision on December 14th with whether or not to lean in. This tells me that we've got a little bit more follow-up to do.
One thing I'll say is that the RFP process will bring to light exactly what's needed, but I do completely understand your concern. The other thing that city staff can do is look into who could provide that type of support, you know, do some preliminary work on that, which we were planning to do anyway, in advance, so that should that support be needed and come to light during this process, that we're ready to wrap around that support, to your point.
So then maybe what I'll do, and I know that there's only 3 of us here, but Mr. Chair, if I need to move to wait for that information before we send this back to council, I can do that.
Well, I think the intention on the 14th is, there is an intention to present it to council. We don't necessarily have to take action on the 14th. So I think that we want to get council's eyes on it, the full council's eyes on it too. I can't find the sheet, but we certainly don't have to take action on the 14th if we don't feel like we have the full complement of information that we need to do so.
Okay, so then what I'll do is I'll move to recommend from the safety committee that we do not take action on the 14th.
I second that.
Even if, I guess I'm not sure I'm following. I mean,
I'm moving that when this is presented on the 14th, I would like to offer a recommendation out of this committee to wait. I realize that we can. I want to say that out of this committee.
okay. Were we intending to take action on the 14th? I think it's just intended to be a presentation on the 14th anyway. So we can do that. I don't know if it's necessary because I don't think we were going to ask for a vote yet.
So I think the intention was to make sure that full council got a chance to hear the results of the assessment, and to get go ahead to continue, which would mean starting the process of getting an RFP together, et cetera. So one of the things that we certainly can do between now and then is get some of these questions answered and include that in the presentation as well on the 14th, if that makes sense from a staff perspective.
So, Ms. Watlington, if the information that we feel like we're lacking is pulled together and disseminated prior to the 14th,
No.
or you're saying
Yeah.
you still wouldn't want to take
Oh,
action?
it's like
Even-
No, that's what the motion that's on the floor is that we will not proceed without that information. So if the information comes, then great, we move. Or we choose whether or not we want to move. But so what has been described is exactly what the motion is.
Okay. I'm fine with that. I'll vote on that. I don't know that we've ever made a motion to predetermine whether we'd take action on something down the road. So procedurally, I don't know how that works, Ms. Johnson.
I don't believe there's anything that would prevent us from offering a recommendation from the committee. I'm pretty sure my motion's in order.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think it's out of order.
Patrick?
I mean, I'm fine with it. If I think we all agree that we want to have that information. I don't know that we needed a motion, but I'm the third vote and I'm fine with it. So if we want to vote on it, that's fine. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, so that passes. I don't want to get bogged down on that point. I think we're in agreement that we need more information before we make a final decision. So, Ms. Watlington, do you have other questions on that piece?
No, that's the main thing. I think that essentially what I'm saying is that I need more information, and it sounds like you guys are wanting to get that. So looking forward to the next update.
Okay, so just to make sure, that I have everything, I'm understanding it. If Sarah's able to answer all of the questions and get all of the information that you need to get you in a more comfortable place, or address all your concerns when she present on the 14th, and if she makes all of the concerns that was brought up today a part of the presentation, then it would be okay to go, we will be looking to get an okay from the council to proceed.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is these items that says, like item number 5, where it says additional support needed to bolster existing viable candidate organizations, I would want to know what that additional support is as much as we can, because somebody's already assessed these initial organizations, and I'd like to know that there is a plan in place to offer up that training to those organizations. And I personally would like to see that before an RFP, because I don't think we need to be looking at RFPs when we know that none of the candidates, we don't need to be conducting an RFP looking at proposals where we know none of the proposals are actually going to deliver the outcomes. So if there is a level of capacity building that we need to do as an interim step, I would prefer to see that so that we can see more robust proposals. That to me would increase the level of confidence that it would be successful. For item number 6, the individuals exist. I'd like to know that we have checked this, and yes, we were able to identify those individuals, because I don't know that we need to lean in on doing an RFP unless we felt confident that these organizations, who right now we're saying don't have the capability, actually knew who these potential staff members could be, right? So those are the 2 ones that are issues for me. And so what I'd like to see is that we've been able to identify some individuals, and I'd like to see that we've got clearly identified training plan for these candidate organizations. I realize that as we look closer at the organizations that we would find out more specific needs, but to me, there's something that we can do right now. If we were able to assess that they don't have the capability, I want to know what the gaps are on the front end, because if they're huge gaps, well, then we don't need the RFP right now. If they're small gaps, that might be something we can offer up to all of the organizations that RFP, so that there's an equal playing field. Because what I don't want to get into is we go in and we look at organizations and nobody hits the metric, and we choose one anyway, and then we invest in them. That doesn't feel like a fair and impartial RFP process.
So one thing I will note is that some of what you're describing is part of what would happen if we contracted with Cure Violence for technical assistance to do more in-depth work, and part of it is what would happen during the RFP process. We can't know if there's folks that we haven't met with who might hit the mark on a lot of different places, in a lot of different components. So I do hear what you're saying, but I also want to be very clear that some of these pieces would happen through a next process, and some of it has to, because we could conduct an RFP and we could determine that we don't have any viable candidates, and that happens sometimes, right, with RFP processes. So we're not.
And that's what this survey is telling me.
We're not bound to select someone just because. However, the ongoing work to sort of set up what the infrastructure would look like and talk to some potential organizations who could act as fiscal agents, that type of work we can start to lay the groundwork for absolutely. But I do sort of want to make sure it's clear that some of what you're describing is outlined in what technical assistance would look like if we were to actually move forward and continue with this effort versus it happening on the front end. Because this was a very preliminary assessment.
Right, that technical assistance part, totally get it. That's why I'd like to understand if what's listed there is intended to get organizations to a place of viability. That to me is separate and apart from the RFP process. So I want to know more specifically what this technical assistance would actually provide, because to me that is the place that you would put in to build capability, so that organizations that might have an interest in RFP or replying to the RFP could be a part of it. But what you described when you said that it's possible that we would do an RFP and no organization show up, that's exactly what this assessment is telling me to expect, right? And of course, to your point, we don't know everybody that exists. To Rajmir's point, we know who we have spoken to. And I just think there's more information that can be answered on the front end. Because right now, this assessment is telling me not to expect success without doing some other things. And so I just think it's a matter of sequencing. What can we do on the front end to ensure that we're going to actually have some viable candidates and we don't end up at the end of this with what we know right now is that everybody needs more training.
And to Assistant City Manager Johnson's question, nothing will preclude, if council has the amount of information it needs to answer the questions that Ms. Ajmer has raised, Ms. Watlington's raised, and undoubtedly others will raise, nothing about the previous motion will preclude us from taking action because it's simply a recommendation from the committee. The council can decide to take action or not based on the information that you provided and if they feel like it's sufficient. Did you have, Mr. Rios, you had a point, or that was, you were going to make the point Ms. Hazel was making?
Yeah, no, I was going to make the same point. Councilmember Johnson, I think what we can begin to do is look at what organizations could serve as a fiscal agent or provide other levels of support, while simultaneously recognizing that the RFP is going to give us a direction on a lot of these other pieces.
And I think I saw Ms. Ajmer's hand go down and back up. So Ms. Ajmer, did you have an additional point to make there?
Yes, I just want to make sure that information that I had requested also is provided before the 14th. Specific response to Ms. Johnson's email. She has asked very specific 2 questions. I would like to get a response to that. And also my earlier questions about what groups and individuals Cure Violence has already met with. And if we can get a list of all the proposals that have been received for all the work, including the technical assistance. If we can get that list, that would be great before the 14th. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And we can get that information for sure. Just a side note, we haven't been actively receiving proposals, except for the reference I think you're making to an email that came in. So I just want to, we can outline this in the response back to you, but I just want to make sure that that's clear.
I'm here to read.
We have a question.
We got an answer.
You said we've got Ms. Williams
Yep.
is going to present to us as well, right?
It's very noticeable. And the seam on the, click. Is there a way to adjust it?
For some reason, that one is more noticeable than the other.
Oh. Very, I don't know if we make John, we can't make John.
You guys are both crazy. Seriously.
So as I'm
It's
clicking through
200-pound
to get
sheet.
to
We can't move it.
Lacey's piece, as you can see, here's a lot of, some of the information that can be fleshed out a little bit more in that response. And then just to tie these 2 together before Lacey takes it away,
You'll get my dry.
one of the things that came up during the Cure Violence Initiative was that there was a lot of interest from the community.
No,
to how
I
can
can
we
move
be
it. You
part
can shift it. I mean, by all
the
means,
effort. So
shift it.
born
What
out
you
of that
want
discussion
flat, or if you
was
want
this
kind of
concept of
crinkled up.
holding a summit. And so
See if there seems in the
I'm just gonna
You're standing
let
right.
one
Lacey
senior-
talk a bit about
Just
that.
watch your.
The one that's on.
You're like right in front of the blue light. Now you'll see them.
Hey, everybody. Lacey Williams here, Equity Office. So, I think one of the things we have sort of found us ourselves in is multiple sort of
You want that?
tactics or strategies at addressing violence, and sort of had to take a time out and say, how do we
I'm not gonna lie.
sort of create a container
black
in which to hold sort of all of this that's community directed. And I think it was Councilmember Graham who suggested the idea of doing a summit. It was a fantastic idea, actually. So
Good,
the
bad, or
summit was
indifferent,
really
whatever
us
the heck
sort of
that is.
taking a couple steps back
Well, you can do
and
the
getting some
whole.
perspective and involving the
Kinda.
community and helping us
Make
define
it look like a
some of the
theater
core
drink.
sort of terms of what community
That hides
safety
it.
means to them. And the idea is that those
So
definitions
if you-
and then the further work, which I'm going to talk about, would then guide multiple investments. So it would guide, of course, there's this cure violence, sort of violence interruption piece, But we also have the Jumpstart grants that have been operating since 2018. We have the proposed $1 million to help support grassroots organizations in a bigger way. We also have corridors of opportunity. So we have all these things sort of operating in this space. How do we sort of get them under the same guide that's community directed? So we did this Charlotte Community Safety Summit. We had 2 opportunities held via Zoom. We had over 100 attendees, which is fantastic. And I actually can do some breakdown for you in terms of demographics. But, you know, most of the people attending were from those corridors of opportunity. We did a really specific outreach effort to get folks from those zip codes. There were nonprofit leaders, community members. We had a member of the Board of Education was on one of the calls. And basically we discussed defining community safety and what are the gaps in services. So most of the time on that call was spent in several breakout groups. The breakout groups were actually co-facilitated by a community member and a staff member. So the staff member was a scribe. And the community member was drawing out information, and the community members that were facilitators actually participated in the other summit. So they both were able to have a chance to be a participant and a facilitator. I think the key takeaways that we found from this is that community serving organizations really feel disconnected from each other. So some of the energy in the room, in the Zoom room, was really around like, oh, I do this work. You do this work, how do we do this work together? So there was a lot of like identifying potential collaborations. And folks identified the need for more resources in terms of money. Money always comes up, skill development, training, and specifically evaluation tools. So, you know, I hear the conversation that we were just having about organizations, and there's a lot of great organizations doing great work. But it's not evidence-based until you have evaluation, and evaluation costs money. And so, you know, as I've been doing the Jumpstart program for, since 2018, and that's the piece that continually seems to be lacking is, you know, there's not an evidence-based idea. It's just an idea that's something that people have passion about. So how do we help seed that, the resources to do the evaluation? And then the thing that really came up a lot was the need for intergenerational work and the infrastructure work. So intergenerational work meaning young people and older folks in a neighborhood not knowing each other, not having relationships. And there doesn't seem to be enough programming that supports that. So what happens there is there's this like tension in that community, right? So older folks think the younger folks are the problem. Young folks don't think the older folks respect them. And so there's like this continual tension in the neighborhood that feeds into a perception of unsafety. And then infrastructure projects, which I think are things that are going to be addressed by Cherry's team with the corridors of opportunity. But, you know, where do streetlights need to be? Where does safety need to be amped up? So our next steps, we have an asset mapping tool that is live right now. Our goal is to get 150 responses to that. What we'll be doing with that is 2 things. We'll be creating a map, an interactive map that organizations can use. Actually 3 things: creating a map, creating a directory that can go out to these organizations so that they can collaborate, and then identifying the gaps. So where there are a lot of organizations working, where are there not a lot of organizations working, and mapping that onto these corridors of opportunity and these durable hotspots for violent crime. So that's sort of where we are with the Community Safety Summit. We do plan to reconvene in mid-December to pull those folks together to talk about what those next steps would be. And as we're looking at the community part of this, we're looking at how do we create a year-long community engagement strategy with with the folks that want to participate, so that they're acting kind of like a steering committee in some ways, that they're really highly engaged, that they're collaborating with each other, that they're hearing about all these different financial opportunities by way of grants, and are able to better then inform us about how we should be pivoting our work. So I feel like I had the easy part of this presentation. Sarah, you took the hard part, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have about this.
Thank you, Lacey. I see Ms. Watlington's hand up.
Yeah, so Lacey, some of what you said here gets back to the other piece that we were talking before. Here, where you guys have already looked, you know who you talked to, you know who attended these summits. Right here, where you've got key takeaways: need resources, money, skill development, training, evaluation tools. Can you connect the dots to this slide 21 here in the presentation, where it said, can you or someone on the team talk about this technical assistance that is being proposed? They've got bullet points here of things. What I'd like to hear is that what you all identified as key takeaways in terms of resource needs under skill development, training, and evaluation tools shows up in this training and technical assistance piece. Is that the intent or not?
So I think when we're talking about two different types of, and this is me, so Sarah might come back and set me straight. But when we're talking about cure violence, they have a very specific type of technical assistance that they'll be giving, and that's really around violence intervention. So that's conflict mediation, that's collecting data, that's about keeping information confidential, that's about things that are working in different parts of the country and across the community. When we're talking about skill development, training, and evaluation tools, I'm talking about grant writing. I'm talking about how to create outcomes and measure outputs that connect with your outcomes, how to create like a theory of change, how to network with other organizations, how to do collaborations, best practices for working with young people, how to develop a board. So like those are what we're looking at in these resources. And this is kind of what we've been doing with Jumpstart, right? And each year we've been amping it up. That's really about how do you run a good organization. Cure Violence's technical support is really about how do you run Cure Violence's evidence-based model that works in other cities in Charlotte, right? And so there may be some overlap, and I think, when we're looking at, some of the community-based organizations and what might stop them from being able to marshal a $390,000 contract, there's the overlap, right, that you're talking about. And so I think the way to solve for that might be having a fiscal sponsor, and they do that in other parts of the country. So I think we don't have a way to solve for that yet. So, I mean, I do think it's important to have that conversation. Look at that Venn diagram. I think you're good at like the processes, Councilmember Watlington. So I'm glad that you're raising that. Yeah, I don't know. I lost my thought, but I think we're on the same page with that.
Yeah, so, that's exactly. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go ahead.
No.
That's exactly what I was trying to get at before. Is that we seem to know at least on these fundamental needs what the gaps are. The technical training from Cure Violence is specific to Cure Violence, but I don't think that is what, unless I misunderstood, what was being captured here when it said additional support needed to bolster existing viable candidate organizations. That sounds like the work that Lacey just covered here, right? So how do those, and I've heard already that you guys are going to bring this back on the 14th, so I understand that this is the work going forward, but how do those line up, right? Because there's no need in my mind to lean in on specific Cure Violence technical training or running this RFP if we know fundamentally that there is capacity building that needs to be done ahead of time. So that's all.
All right. Ms. Ajmer, did you have anything for? No?
Oh, I'm good. I like Miss Williams' background there.
I want you to pull one of those Are those ukuleles, Lacey?
The guitars and a mandolin.
A mandolin, yes. I'm not good
Next
at.
council meeting, I'll have an original song for you, okay? Councilman Brandt.
Don't say it if you don't mean it.
I don't mean it, so I shouldn't have said it.
Well, it's been said now, so we will be looking forward to very eagerly the score that you provide for the next community safety meeting. So thank you for offering that. Ms. Johnson?
Yes. The next item we have was the next year calendar review. The meetings will stay on the Tuesday, first Tuesday of the month. Those dates will be sent out. I can list them out to you. There are two exceptions. The one on June 1st, it will be, no meetings will be in July and August due to council summer scheduled meetings. And the meeting on November 2nd will be rescheduled as needed because of the general election on that day. So other than those exceptions that was stated, but as soon as this meeting is over, this will be sent out and you should have it no later than Friday. So you will be able to log these dates in your calendar ahead of time.
Perfect. But as you can see on the agenda, and most relevant to you probably at this moment, is our next meeting is on January 5th.
Yes.
And we are going back, as we did today, to those standing meetings being the first Tuesday and at noon. So with that, unless there is anything else that needs to be brought forward, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Ms. Watlington wants to unmute herself in second. We'll all head home.
Second.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, staff, for all the great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.